Born to Annoy, Boot 1, Part 2, From Rebel to Revolutionary. Chapter 1, Tender Drawing Office. I was now past my 17th birthday, and my stint with Harry and Johnny was coming to an end. My next berth was to be the Tender Drawing Office. I already had the tools required, namely a set of quality drawing instruments and my best suit. In those days, a suit and tie and a shirt of a suitable colour, preferably white, were the standard for employment in the drawing office. Harry, following the tradition set by Maggie, presented me with a boot, or rather a pamphlet in his case, a copy of the Communist Manifesto, first published in 1848, and authored by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. This choice took me by surprise. I had no reason to think that Harry was a communist. I later discovered he wasn't, and never had been. He was a Labour Party member. But the fitter who had taught him his trade had been a member of the party, and he presented Harry with a copy when he completed his time. He told me he still read the pamphlet with pleasure. It was written a long time ago, Malc, but it contains many pearls of wisdom still applicable to the times we live in. Mind you, he said, wryly, you won't find much Stalinism in it. Marx and Engels were fundamentally Democrats. Naturally, I'd heard of Stalin, but I didn't have any real clue as to what Harry was talking about. Later, I was to learn many things about the Georgian dictator, not least of his betrayal of the communist cause, his murder of thousands of members of the Communist Party, and his mass murder of millions of Soviet citizens. Once again, Red Maggie was to be my source of enlightenment, but that lay in the future. Up to this point in my apprenticeship, I'd had little contact with any sections of management. They were a kind of foe, only seen on the dim and distant horizon by the likes of me. On commencing work in the machine shop and the erection department, I'd had to report to the departmental foreman, and I'd experienced the incident with the deacon, but that was about it. They were merely lowly supervisors, little more than factory policemen. The Tender Drawing Office was to be different. The manager, Mr. Lawton, wasn't a foe in any sense of the word, but a most remarkable and kindly old man. He headed a small team consisting of a junior draftsman, Ken Fuller, Sheila Parsons, a senior draftswoman, Satish Puri, a student apprentice on secondment from AI India, and last but not least, yours truly. Ken was a bit of a god-botherer, being a member of the Salvation Army, but as a result of his religious affiliations he was also a musician, playing the trombone in the Ira Openshaw Citadel's brass band. I soon learned he loved jazz, and had recently formed a jazz band with like-minded but non-religious mates. Satish Puri seemed very exotic at first. He rarely wore a suit, defying the accepted convention. Instead he sported a pair of grey flannel trousers and an immaculate fawn Harris tweed jacket. He cut a very handsome and tall, slim figure, with more than a touch of the English aristocrat about his manner and his speech. An Indian version of Bertie Wooster springs to mind. I was to learn pretty soon he had a wonderful sense of humour. Sheila must have been about 34, having started work in the machine shop during the war like Maggie. There was some friction between Ken and her, no doubt arising from her seniority over him. There must have been over 100 draftsmen employed by AI Openshaw, but she was the only female. Ken wasn't the most enlightened male in his attitude to women. I had the advantage of having been brought up by Dolly and Beatty, and had subsequently benefited from Maggie's wisdom and tutelage. Accordingly, I knew my place. I'm not saying I didn't suffer from the sin of sexism. There were few males free of that blemish in those days, but I knew when to hold my tongue in the face of a superior being. Consequently, I got on very well with Sheila, and she soon became my main source of enlightenment in the art and practical science of draftsmanship. If I'd been half as talented at seduction as I was at working with women, I'd have enjoyed a wonderful sex life. Still, as Auntie Dolly once informed me, you can't have everything. My new manager, Mr. Lawton, also had a positive impact on me. When I'd first made my way into the drawing office, on the first Monday morning, and made myself known to him, it wasn't without some trepidation on my part. In many ways I suffer from a somewhat nervous disposition and was terribly shy with strangers. Anybody who knows me well will tell you that I suffer from a natural head tremor. Whenever I'm under stress, my tremor, which I am not normally conscious of, becomes a shake. Obviously at that point, I do become aware of it, which doesn't help calm my nerves. Mr. Lawton, however, soon put me at my ease. He explained that the tender drawing office was so named because we had the job of providing the general layout drawings to be sent to our potential customers, the central electricity generating board and the local area electricity boards, whenever the company tendered for a new order. Two things were important, therefore. The drawings must be neat and well executed, and the dimensions and written information on them must not only be accurate, but easily read. We're in competition with other manufacturers, Malcolm. Price isn't the only factor. Initial impressions are vital. A well-presented drawing can often clinch a deal. I was to learn later price was seldom the key factor, not least because there was plenty of price fixing going on between our so-called competitive manufacturers, as well as a system known as Buggins' turn, by which one manufacturer with a full order book will submit an uncompetitive tender in order to favour those in greater need. Nonetheless, Mr. Lawton's advice was good advice, and complimented Red Maggie's teaching that I should take pride in my work. "If you need any help or advice, ask Sheila," Mr. Lawton advised me. "The first thing to do is to persuade her to show you how to sharpen a pencil." Alas, I took this last bit of advice as an affront to my dignity. After all, I wasn't exactly a novice at engineering drawing, as I thought my new mentor must have believed, a wrong assumption on my part as it happened. By the time the bell rang to signal the break for dinner, I had my first contribution to the output of the tender drawing office well underway. 10 minutes before the break for sustenance, Sheila stood at my side, examining my work and smelling of violets. "You're a bit of a natural, young Malc. Very impressive." I can remember looking at her, not sure if she was taking the piss. "There's just one thing," she continued. "Come to my drawing board and bring your pencil." She climbed onto her high stool, her skirt sliding just above her knee, as she leant over to recover a small knife from her drawer. I couldn't help noticing, being a mere male, that she had a rather shapely bottom. She held out her hand and I passed over the 2H pencil. She began to sharpen it carefully, leaving quite a long point. She then took a thin rectangular block of wood hanging by string from the bottom of her drawing board, to which was pasted a piece of emery cloth. She began to carefully file the pencil lead to a chisel-shaped point. "There," she said at last. "You'll find that you can draw a much more accurate and uniformly thin line with that. The chisel edge will enable you to keep your pencil flat against the straight edge, and you'll find its greater surface area will mean less sharpening. When you write, it will be like using an italic pen, and give your lettering a distinctive style. Never use a pencil sharpener. It won't give you a long enough lead for the chiseled point." I thanked her and took the pencil off her, suddenly conscious of her lovely smile, her twinkling blue eyes and her long, slender, nylon-clad legs, as she perched rather elegantly on her high stool. I was beginning to develop a penchant for mature women, and knew I'd dream of her that night. In fact, I did. Although, having been brought up to behave like a gentleman, I of course must keep the details of my erotic fantasy, and its rather sticky conclusion, to myself. My ego had also learnt another lesson. I should have listened more carefully to Mr. Lawton. I wondered why I'd never been taught this method of sharpening a pencil by any of my engineering drawing lecturers. When the bell finally signalled the break, I asked Sheila if she'd like to accompany me to the canteen. Much to my surprise, she agreed. We walked down the yard towards and then alongside the main factory building. The canteen, or rather the canteens, were situated in a building on the right-hand side of the access road, just before the main factory gates opening out onto Edison Street. Instinctively, I turned towards the first set of doors, leading into the works canteen. "Hold on a minute," Sheila said. "Aren't you going into the staff canteen?" I'd clean forgot I was now a staff worker. However, I needed to see Dad, and I intended to eat with Maggie, which was by then my custom. I persuaded Sheila it would be all right, and she went along with me. As soon as I entered, I spotted Maggie, walked over, and introduced my new colleague. Both women laughed, greeting each other like long-lost friends. That's when I first discovered they had worked together in the machine shop. After I'd spoken to Dad, I returned to them. Maggie said, "My, you look smart in your new suit, Mal." She leant towards me and then adjusted the Windsor knot of my slim Jim tie. "Perfect," she said. "What do you reckon, Sheila?" "Not bad, for a boy." "Yes, but such a pretty boy. He'll break a few hearts before he's done. He just needs a bit of lead in his pencil." "I'm not sure you're quite right there, Maggie. You see, I've just had the pleasure of sharpening his—" At this point, I rather rudely intervened, sensing that this rather sarcastic banter would inevitably lead to my further embarrassment. I suggested to Sheila we retrieve our food before the canteen staff stopped serving. Maggie had already finished her main course. Whilst the shop floor dinner hour commenced at 12, the staff had to wait until 12:15, although both sets of workers started the afternoon shift at 1 o'clock.